Let's start by talking about smell. Why is it so important that somebody smells good?
I mean, I think it's one of these underappreciated qualities, right? That you don't think about it that often when you're like listing off the qualities that you really need to have in a romantic partner. But what we saw in this recent study that Eli was also a critical part of, this large study that we conducted across many thousands of people across the world, is that people seem to be regularly underestimating the appeal of finding somebody who they think smells good to them. And look, it's hard to be close or intimate with somebody if their smell turns you off in some way. So it's one of these things that like isn't top of mind when you ask people to list what they want in a partner, but it turns out to have practical value in the real experience of sexual attraction for somebody.
Mm-hmm. Eli, do you want to chime in on that?
The only thing that I would find interesting to study, I don't know if this has been done yet, is to find out whether the thing that smells good to me is the thing that smells good to Paul. So surely it's the case that I care a lot that the woman I'm with smells appealing to me, every bit as much, if not more so, that I smell appealing to her. What we don't know is that the same smell for everybody? And that would be an interesting study to run, but we don't know the answer yet.
I would imagine it's got to be different. And I don't know the scientific background behind this, but to me it seems instinctively that it would be different.
I mean, it's one of these things that as behavioral scientists, we don't have great ways of quantifying about smells. I mean, a lot of people, I had a very brief stint where I was very into wine, and like the amount of time it takes to get trained to just be able to describe the different smells in wine, much less a person. I mean, we just don't have great ways of talking about it. It's just this ephemeral thing that you just experience in the moment.
And I suppose to somebody, if they really care about smell, then they might have an extreme rating for, oh, this person's a 10 out of 10. I love the way they smell. But somebody who's not so influenced by that will go, I like his cologne. This is another interesting element to smell is it how they smell, their skin, their oils, their sweat? Or is it the hygiene choices that they make and the products they apply? Do you have any way of knowing what the difference is between the two?
I'm taking this one. I don't think the research is where it would need to be for this. One thing that I think is interesting when we think about the impact of smell is something that we experience as if it emanates from an object. It could be a significant other. It could be a one-night stand. It could be rotten eggs. It could be roses, right? And what's interesting about that is that none of those things possess a smell. We possess a brain that then translates into a specific psychological experience. So yes, it's true that objects in the world, including human objects, give off certain chemicals. Those chemicals indeed enter our nose, but it is not a smell that is outside of us and is part of them. It's why dogs engage in smelling behaviors that you and I find absolutely appalling. Like, I would never want to go around smelling the stuff that dogs smell. But the thing is, there's not a bad smell or a good smell that exists in nature. There are smells that we process in different sorts of ways. So some of the things that are going to smell good and bad in a partner are probably going to generalize across most of us. That is, most of us are going to find it to be unappealing when somebody smells like they haven't showered in several months, right? That will be generally unappealing. And that's because we have evolved to have a disgust response into things that feel or smell rotting and dirty, right? And that is a sensible adaptation. But within the normal range of people that you might actually encounter and go on a date with, I don't think we know as much as I wish we did about what sorts of smells might you have that are especially appealing to me, but wouldn't be as appealing to the next person? And certainly when we get down to the chemical level of analysis and what sorts of smells are interesting to what sorts of people, hugely important study. 2100 social psychology is going to have some cool answers to that questions, I think.
Yeah, right.
Did you have anything to add there, Paul?
Just that I think this distinction between like what are the products that people are using versus what are the natural smells that they give off. I mean, I think that's very important. And I do know that in a lot of the classic studies, that have tried to capture smell in some way. Again, they're not quantifying what makes somebody smell differently than somebody else, but they are very careful to tell the research participants, okay, no scented products for the next week, right? And then you're going to wear these T-shirts and stuff. And so they're really trying to get at people's natural smells with the assumption that it has there's some inner genetic component. Again, I think it'll be a very long time, if ever, that we're able to quantify how a given person's genes translate into something smell related that we could describe. But I do think that there are a lot of products and things these days that kind of have a smoothing effect over the natural individual differences that you might see.
Interesting.
Yeah. A couple of things I've noticed as well are, to an extent, everybody interprets a fragrance that is universally the same. Let's say it's a popular cologne. That cologne is actually composed of the same things in every single bottle. But people will have a very different opinion on whether that smells good or not. I've also noticed with your personal smell, your personal odor, when people don't have an emotional attachment to the other person, I think they have less appetite for that person's natural odors. Maybe this has happened to you as well. When you get into a relationship or a marriage and they start liking the way you smell more, if you didn't shower. I used to come back from a workout and my girlfriend at the time would say, "Don't shower, I love the way you smell when you're all sweaty." Whereas if I'd done that on our first date, she probably would have ran a mile.
That's a great point. I mean, I think there are all sorts of things that as we get in a relationship with somebody and we get to know them over time, how those little features of somebody else and also what they connect to about our memories with that person in particular end up having a huge impact on how happy we are with that person. I mean, Eli and I spend a lot of time analyzing movies, right? We host a podcast where we talk about how relationship science is relevant to popular movies called Love Factually. And one of the things we talk about all the time, I mean, rarely are they talking about smells in movies. That doesn't really hit with the audience in the same way. But certainly the idea that, like, as I spend more time with this person, we develop little customs and rituals. There are things about you that I appreciate that nobody else does. I mean, this is, absolutely one of the most common things you see in the romantic dramas and romantic comedies that get the science right.
Interesting. And you mentioned at the start of the discussion on smell that this is one of the biggest differences between what people said they wanted and then what people actually wanted. So could you explain a bit more about the difference when you're doing research about stated and revealed preferences?
Do it.
Paul, this is your bailiwick, man. Give it up.
Okay. Twisted my arm. So for a very long time, the research we had on mate preferences kind of sort of went like this. Hey, Gent, tell us about what it is you're looking for in a romantic partner. Here are some traits for you to evaluate and rate. Okay? Well, you take a rating scale, you say, oh, these traits would be particularly important to me, these traits not so much. We call those stated preferences. They capture people's ideas about what they like in a partner. Just because they're your ideas doesn't mean that they're not useful. They probably tell us a lot about how you might construct your dating pool, for example. But it is not necessarily true that those are the attributes that are going to appeal to you when you meet people face to face. That concept is something we call a revealed preference. It's when you are meeting people, how do their attributes strike you? Do you tend to like the people who are especially funny or especially exciting or especially warm and caring? And on average, we find that the correspondence between what people say they're looking for and what they actually prefer in the moment, that distinction between stated and revealed preferences, it's not zero, but whoa, is it a lot smaller than most people would think.
Okay. So people do mostly know what they're looking for.
No. I think that effect is pretty small. It is, especially if you're talking about a single attribute. Okay, and here's an example that I think will be clarifying.
Okay, sure.
Let's talk about Eli. Because this will be more fun. Eli tells me, Paul, I cannot date somebody who is not easygoing. Okay, high maintenance women, not for me. He has said this. When Harry Met Sally is very meaningful for him because of how high maintenance Sally is. He can't handle it. Okay, so he tells me, Paul, I cannot date any women who are high maintenance. Okay, please do not introduce me to high maintenance women. He's married, by the way, but we're pretending. If Eli were to go out and date a number of women who varied in how high maintenance they were, okay, his preference for the easygoing women, despite the fact that he has told me he really wants this, would, I don't know, maybe be like 52% versus 48%, right? Like extraordinarily tiny. And in part, that's because any given attribute like that has got to compete with all of these other attributes. So even though Eli is sitting here swearing to me this is his number one thing, ultimately in the moment, it's going to get swamped by his other experiences of the person. And furthermore, and then I'll toss it to Eli and he can defend himself, he's going to do this too when I set him up on these dates. He's going to meet somebody who's kind of high maintenance that he kind of likes anyway. And so what he's going to do is he's going to turn around and tell me, oh yeah, I know I said I couldn't be with somebody high maintenance, but I didn't mean this kind of high maintenance is exciting. I like this kind of drama. So he's going to reinterpret her trait to actually be the good version of the thing so he can not worry about the fact that technically she was not what he was looking for on paper.
I see.
Yeah. Everybody needs a wingman like Paul. If you tell him what you don't want in a partner, he will just deliver all sorts of women who have those attributes. But yeah, the evidence on this kind of blew me away. I assumed that people, if you say, I really care about how funny a woman is, but I don't care that much about how good looking she is, and your best friend says, I really care how good looking a woman is, I don't care how funny she is, it should be the case that you're really into the funny women relative to the unfunny women, and he's really into the attractive women relative to the less attractive women. That effect is nearly zero. It's basically zero. And the reason why this matters is because we're regularly swiping left on people. We think we have some attribute that's like, no, that's a deal breaker, can't tolerate that. Well, if it's true that we have insight into what it is that's going to inspire our attraction when we meet face to face, then it's reasonable to rule people out based on some sort of deal breaker. There's very little evidence that people can actually do this, that they actually have the insight into the romantic preferences that they think they have.
So to an extent, this idea that we have in pop culture of a type, she's my type, he's my type, that falls apart quite quickly once you get into the science of those specific attributes that form a type.
Yes, that's right. And actually, I think it's really interesting why we think we have types. And this is something that the science doesn't totally know. Paul, you've played in this space a little bit.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this is when we're constructing our preferences, right? It's not like preferences were revealed to us by God on Mount Sinai, right? We have to construct a story about what it is in partners that make us attracted to them. When we construct those preferences, what do? We sort of like look around. It's like, I don't know, like I've dated a few people and they seem to have these things. And so now we tell ourselves a story about these are the qualities that we really like. And then we're shocked when we fall in love with somebody that really had none of those qualities or didn't have the constellation of qualities that we thought mattered the most.
My favorite example of this is religiosity. We have a paper a few years ago that looked at religiosity among other attributes. And what we're doing is we're looking at people's exes. Okay,
so this is people who are the same religion as you are. That would be the preference, right?
It's actually like, think about it on a scale, like how religious is somebody, right? Somebody, whatever the religion is, could be that they go to mosque every day, or they
church.
Never go to any kind of church whatsoever. Okay, so it's like a level of religiosity. Now, it so happens that some people live in more religious areas of the country, surrounded by people who are higher rather than lower on religiosity. So in what we do in this study effectively is, again, I'm going to use Eli as a punching bag here because it's fun. So imagine I take all of Eli's exes, okay, and I look at how religious they are. They are very likely to be similarly religious, but that is because Eli comes from a particular area of the country with a particular level of religiosity. When you account for that, the whole association goes away.
So it's not that I picked religious people.
Right.
I see.
You dated randomly within your pool.
Yeah.
but your pool was already
religious.
structured to give you, probably in your case, women who weren't terribly religious, right? You might think you were choosing them based on this, but actually within your pool, you were not.
Okay, so what does this say now about people who have a very strong physical type that isn't necessarily found in abundance in their environment? If a man really has a preference for brunettes over blondes, yet he lives in the Midwest where a lot of the women are brunette, a lot of the women are blonde, what does that say about him, and what's really going on there on an, as far as we understand, on an evolutionary level?
Paul, that one's you.
I confess, it is. We have yet to see much evidence of any kind that people have types in the way that this hypothetical guy is describing. Right? Again, people.
So
form
in the
these
revealed way.
Yeah, in a
Okay.
revealed way. Like, again, people have very strong ideas. So if this guy really thinks he likes blondes, like, he might be buying a ticket to Southern California, right? He might be trying to put himself into a space where he's going to meet more of these women. He might be very motivated to do that. But I have yet to see the study showing that he's going to find more success, find more people he's attracted to if he goes to Southern California than if he stays right where he is.
One thing that I think is useful for this conversation is to think, how could social scientists assess this stuff, right? So people have these strong intuitions. You go around and ask people, do you have a type? Do you have preferences? Do you prefer flatter-chested or more robust-chested women? Whatever. People can tell you that stuff, and they will be confident. So how is it that Paul and I can come on your show and say they're wrong, right? They think they have these insights and we don't.
I am very confident about mine, so I want to know why I'm wrong.
You, sir, are an exception. You have infinite insight.
Thank
Socrates
you.
saw you coming and knew it was going to be here on this date. But you can't really figure this out just by asking people, and you can't really figure it out just by seeing whom people date. Because like Paul said, there's all sorts of reasons why you might end up with a bunch of blondes. You thought you were into blondes, so you flew to Southern California. Lo and behold, you're dating a blonde, but of course you went to the place where there's tons of blondes. So how do you know this? Well, we do things like run speed dating events, right? Our own speed dating events, right? Sometimes we collaborate with companies, but sometimes literally on campus, for example, on Northwestern's campus, just up the road from you, we will run our own speed dating events at a coffee house.
Where was my invite, Eli?
You didn't get it yet. So we have a coffee shop on campus. We have these speed dating events, and so we know the 12 women that you've met. We know the 12 women who have met you. We know what the other men at that event thought about all 12 of these women and what all those women thought about all the other men. And so what we can do that in real life you just don't get. You'd need to be able to do this in some sort of rigorous scientific way, but we can actually find out, okay, you said you really care about how attractive or charismatic a woman is, and you care more about that than other people say they care. Is it in fact true that you are more attracted to the women you rate as more charismatic rather than less than the next guy who said he didn't care about charisma? And the answer, study after study after study, is no. Once you actually get like a full selection of options for people, turns out that they're attracted to all sorts of stuff, and they tell themselves a story that is not really predicated in reality. It's predicated in like intuitions about the experiences they've had.
So when it comes to the classic matchmaker role, if somebody were to sit their client down in the office and say, tell me what you want, and then they present them all these options, it sounds like that's almost a completely useless strategy.
I think, so first of all, I have a lot of sympathy for people with that job, because that job sounds hard, and I don't have that job.
Yeah.
That sounds very
Don't worry.
challenging.
None of them are listening.
Right. And that a lot of what you're trying to do is show your client that you're listening to them, that their experiences are valid, that their ideas about what they like are valid, and you're trying to get them to sort of play ball, right? Be willing to open their minds a little bit to different people. I would not know how to do that, how to engage with somebody in that way. But to my mind, a lot of what makes dating, people have more success in dating in general when they are able to open their minds and sort of broaden their search at least a little bit, right? Consider people who might not have fit exactly what you said you were looking for. And that sometimes this sense that like, I keep dating losers is really a function of the narrow casting that you're already doing, Like,
I
you are
see.
surrounded by too many losers. You need to sort of move in a different direction and try to expand your horizons a bit.
That's true. I'm kind of imagining this girl who's always hanging around with the low club tier bands and dating the musicians. Why does this keep happening to me?
Why
all
does
these guys
this
are
keep
broke.
happening?
They all live with their mom still. Yeah.
Right. Very creative and very broke.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a danger, and I'm not asking you to comment on this from a particularly professional or educated perspective, but as somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about this kind of stuff, is there a danger for a person to have a very clear idea of what they want on paper, both physical and emotional attributes? Then they end up with somebody totally different, and they're happy with them, but they go, my Disney fantasy hallmark moment of meeting the one finally never came true. Does that perhaps bring some dissatisfaction into a relationship? In other words, this is why I'm scared of dating outside my type.
Right. Because you want the fairy tale?
Yeah.
I do think there's two things that you brought up. The first one is there a risk of considering somebody outside of your type and then ultimately ending up being disappointed? And the second is a broader version of that idea, which is, are there sorts of fairy tale expectations that we bring to our relationship that are setting us up for disappointment? Let me answer the second one first. The answer is yes. The answer is that if we are unreasonable in the expectations that we are bringing, now this is separate from my type or not my type, but things like my partner will always make me feel loved, or the sex with my partner will always be hot. Those are good things, but they're a little risky because once you insert words like always, there might be moments where it's not true. And then you start to say, uh-oh, am I seeing some evidence here that this person isn't a good fit for me? So with regard to like having expectations that you bring to the relationship, one of the key ideas I've played with myself, I wrote a book called The All or Nothing Marriage that engages seriously with these ideas, that you really want to calibrate your expectations to what your relationship can actually deliver, given who you are, who I am, who the two of us are together. Where are our strengths? Let's lean into those. Where are our weaknesses? Let's try to expect a little bit less on those things. But the first question that you asked is it dating outside of your type that will place you at especially high risk for that? Look, I cannot say that won't ever happen, but there is no compelling scientific evidence to date that says that the thing that places you at risk for eventual disappointment is that you've dated somebody outside your type. I would not be concerned about that issue unless some new data come to bear that we haven't seen yet.
And when you say it that way, it sounds quite ridiculous, actually, to even assume that.
Paul?
Yeah, one thing that I would add as well is that, we can also look at matched versus mismatched couples, right? Mm-hmm. And there's actually a ton of research looking at similarity on couples on a whole variety of different dimensions, right? Because you might assume that like you're going to get along better when you're similar to somebody. Even things like political orientation and like all of the effects of these kinds of things, they're just shockingly small. Yeah. And that what matters so much more is that within the context of a given relationship that you cultivate the similarities, that you create in each other the things that excite you about each other. That we're not these like static creatures with fixed attributes and fixed interests as we go into relationships. We shape each other, and it's mostly that shaping process that makes people happy or miserable.
I imagine it's also... Sorry, go ahead.
Just one quick thing on that. It's kind of wild that, Paul, when you're talking about, even religious matching or political matching, these effects are tiny. We're not talking about swiping behavior. Right? These are humongous effects, right? In the last 10 years, whole lots of people would refuse to, like date a Trump supporter, for example, or insert your preferred person here. So those effects are massive. The topic that Paul and I explore is, stipulated on you actually meeting a person. How big are those sorts of effects? And that's where the effects get small.
Right, absolutely. And I suppose to an extent, we've moved from what I like to call the human ball pit approach to dating, which is where you're a very social person, you go out all the time, you get drunk with people, you're just crossing paths all the time, which is how a lot of people used to meet, right? Yeah. Whereas now we have this very analytical approach of swiping. And I'll get a bit more onto that in a bit because it's a huge rabbit hole that we could get down. I just wanted to give the guys, because it is probably 92% men that are listening to this, in terms of some of the biggest discrepancies of what women said they wanted versus what they actually wanted. What do women say they're looking for in a man, but in reality, it's actually not that important, and vice versa?
Yeah, so this is an interesting domain, especially when it comes to attributes where there are classically thought to be gender differences. And I'm thinking here about the fact that men say they care about attractiveness more than women, and women say they care about earning potential and ambition more than men. This is something we've been looking at for a very long time in our work.
Like 20 years at this point.
Like 20 years. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And, those stated differences are very well known. But the reality is, when you look at how attractiveness inspires romantic interest, and here I could be talking about like my judgment of somebody's attractiveness, or I could be talking about, some sort of consensual rating of that person's attractiveness. Usually in relationships, what really matters is whether you think they're attractive.
Yeah.
But regardless of what kind of measure of attractiveness we're talking about, the power of those judgments to predict things like attraction and relationship satisfaction, it is exactly the same for men and women. And in this recent study, we were able to quantify sort of who's getting it wrong. Like, we were never able to do that in prior studies for a variety of reasons, but in this recent study with about 10,000 people from around the world, we could look at, okay, men and women, you say there's a difference. There isn't a difference in the revealed preference side. So where's the mismatch happening? With attractiveness, what we found is that both men and women, their stated preferences underestimate how much attractiveness actually matters to them, but women are underestimating more than men, right?
Interesting.
On their stated side, right? So the stated side, women are below men, but they both come up together to meet at the same level with how much it actually matters, right? So two underestimations, but women are underestimating more. They've got a larger gap to make up to sort of meet where the men are. On the earning potential side, it's a different pattern. Again, women say they care about earning potential more than men. Earning potential does not predict things like relationship satisfaction as powerfully as thinking your partner is attractive, but it matters a little bit. Again, matters the same for men and women, right? Shocking to some. It was shocking to us 20 years ago. It's not shocking now. Here's a case where the mistake is happening by both men and women in the opposite direction. So women are overestimating how much they care about earning potential vis-a-vis their revealed preferences, and men are actually underestimating, right? They think, I don't really care if she's ambitious, but actually you would find it appealing if you started dating Nicole Kidman and Baby Girl.
Right. That's a great movie. Let me just say that. I watched that on a date a few days ago.
Oh, right.
Yeah, good date movie. So, speaking of that, actually, I wanted to run this by you. So I was on this date recently, and she tells me I have written down 21 attributes that I'm looking for in my future husband. Never known anybody to do this before. So she pulls up the Notes app on her phone, and I said, I want to see this. And lo and behold, and they weren't really physical, apart from one about being over 5'10". They weren't really physical, but they were more things about making over a certain amount of money, loves animals, wants the same number of children as I do, various kind of characteristic, and painting a picture of your future life together. So, you're shaking your head there. I would love to know how much of a fallacy is this list, and is there any extent to which it's actually a healthy and productive behavior to be so intentional about our potential partners?
I'll start on this one.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. And I'll censor this clip.
Yeah, right.
No. I mean,
I'm kidding.
There's some sense in which you could say, what's the harm? So this woman, let's imagine for a moment that she has a lot of options, that she's attractive and appealing and gets a lot of right swipes on the apps and has her choice. Do I think that it's going to be harmful for her to take somebody that matches more of these things rather than fewer of these things? No. I don't think there's a real danger in that. I actually think the real danger is the real danger isn't that I think she will end up with someone bad for her if this happens. The real danger is she will omit from considerations people who could have been just as good for her. So I think the risk is on the what you might call a false negative rather than a false positive, failing to be with somebody appealing rather than ending up with somebody who isn't appealing. So I think she's probably fine. In general, being aware of what sorts of interests you have is a good thing. So it's not a crazy idea. Goal setting is reasonable. But one thing that's kind of weird about the way that the modern West thinks about marriage is that it is going to be a love-based thing. Almost nobody these days in the West marries if they aren't in love, or at least they won't admit it because it would be shameful usually to admit that. I've talked about not just love, but also authenticity, personal growth, that you might think I love the guy, but I just don't feel like I'm growing in the relationship, and so I'm not going to do that, right? These are, again, interesting sorts of new expectations that we have for our relationships that didn't exist, say, 100 years ago, for example. So what are the consequences of caring about all these things? Well, I think many of them are reasonable, but one thing that we don't consider very much is this is a long-term deal. Marriage isn't lease with an option to buy. And so what we do is in our 20s or maybe our 30s, we date and then we go to Europe and are like, oh my God, it's great. And the sex is great. And then we think, yes, I love the person and this is forever. It is a big, bold choice because you will change over time. I mean, heaven forbid that you at your age are done growing, done changing. So you will change. Your spouse will change. And circumstances will confront you with new sorts of things, right? Becoming a parent is a tremendous stressor to new couples, to relatively young couples. And a major reason why is because all the things that we really liked about each other, or at least many of them, are now irrelevant. The date nights aren't there. The visiting the coffee shop isn't there. The frequency of sex is down substantially. The money's tighter. There's all sorts of things like that have changed. Are we a good match at 32 in the way that we were at 28? And then, of course, somebody gets fired and is unemployed at age 43 and hadn't anticipated it. And his identity is tied up in his professional life. And now he's dealing with shame and insecurity, right? These are things that will happen to most of us some version of these things. And then later there's a cancer diagnosis, right? So on down the list, we make this big flying leap. Now, people have always made that leap for marriage. But it didn't used to be that marriage was about the psychological fulfillment of the spouses. Marriage was a sacrament before God. Marriage was something that you did for the community. Your family approved or didn't approve. Maybe your family decided who your partner was. Now we have this new model. When I say new, I mean last 50 to 100 years, we have this new model where it's really about my fulfillment and your fulfillment. So I don't know what to say. This woman that you went on a date with, I believe her when she's talking about the 21 things that she thinks she really values right now. And I don't know, there's a lot of good lines about the perils of planning, but do I think at double her age right now and then triple her age right now, these are going to be the things that are going to matter to her? Maybe, but the predictive value of these things, the consistency of these things over time are unlikely to be very high.
I'll jump in with also another I think useful tale about the stability of a person's interest by consulting the scientific text La La Land, directed by Damien Chazelle. In this movie, Sebastian, played by Ryan Gosling, is adamant he will not date somebody who does not like jazz. This is very clear.
Adamant.
He meets Mia, and one of the first things she says to him is, by the way, I need you to know this. I don't like jazz.
And she says Kenny G. She's like, Kenny G.
Yeah, right,
That's
right,
jazz
right,
for her.
Right. That's jazz for her. And his response is to take her to a jazz club and to try to get her to feel his love for jazz. Okay? It is not to bail. It is to show her what it is that he loves about it. Now, that is not to say that if this woman really likes you and you are missing 3 or 4 of those attributes, that her job now is to change you to have all of those attributes. But
I'm the full package, Paul. Don't worry.
There you go. So, right. So you didn't have any problem.
I'm not sure what the full package means.
Yeah. Right.
Hey, that was number 21.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. It's the most save best for last. But these things are flexible, both in the attributes people have and what they think they want. And a lot of what makes a relationship work is being able to be flexible with those things and to be able to deliver things that are important to your partner, but also to negotiate, like, okay, but what does it really mean? Like, can we get to that need in a different way if there's something that you aren't able to do?
Yeah. What I was thinking, especially Eli, when you were describing how all of these things in life come your way, losing a job, cancer, etc., what I was picturing in my mind was that those 21 attributes start to erode in terms of importance, right? The fact that he doesn't really like our dog as much as I do doesn't matter that much when he's lost his job. And I would imagine that as you go through the most difficult things in life, what makes a couple good together, or what makes a good partner, becomes more universal. They are those traits that everybody wants, whether that's compassion, emotional understanding, patience, etc. So maybe this is how our stated preferences end up not being that important to our overall relationship
that is a
satisfaction.
fascinating way to convey it. Now, there are individual differences in how much people say they want those things. How much do you care about kindness in a partner? There are individual differences. Those don't predict, like the rest of the stuff we've been talking about, your stated preferences for how much you care about how kind, friendly, responsive your partner is do not predict whether you're attracted to the kinder, more responsive people. That effect is also near zero. But you are right that there is something approximating like a kindness core that is foundational to all of the long-term relationships. Not really essential for a very hot affair, possibly even a year. But yes, if you feel like your partner ultimately isn't responsive to you, now that's again a little bit separate from what are they like to everybody in the world. But yes, if you don't get to a place where you feel like my partner cares for my well-being, it's difficult to imagine you being happy in a relationship like that. It seems essential.
I really think that is key. Like this distinction between attribute, what are you like? What is the truth about you versus what are you like with me?
With me.
So one of the examples you used was animal lover, and I think that's actually great because animal lover can be an attribute, but I bet what matters is that you love her dog.
Yes,
right? Her
exactly.
specific
that is what
dog.
she cares about. You're right.
Exactly.
You can be a non-animal lover and love that dog.
Lassie?
Right?
Who cares?
Yeah, right. Exactly. So it's like the attribute far less important than the attribute
That's right.
with me. And
So
how do we get to that place?
I'd like to riff on that. I mean, we started this Love Factually podcast mainly as like a Trojan horse to try to get relationship science out to people who might not otherwise turn into a science podcast. So, we talk about each episode is a film. So, 10 Things I Hate About You or Clueless or whatever. Sometimes, more art films like Eyes Wide Shut or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But what's been so interesting about doing these episodes with Paul, like that we've basically taken these romantic films as serious texts. Like, what do we make of them? What are the messages they're sending about relationships? Which of these messages is accurate? Which of these messages is inaccurate? One of the themes that you see a lot in these films, especially sort of the teen romance film, is the idea that there are like 10s and there are like 2s.
Yeah.
And this is related to like, do we want someone who's like a dog lover, or do we want somebody who's like good to my dog, like loves my dog like me, and the two of us love being with my dog together? The reason why that's so significant is the prevailing view that there are 10s out there are 6s, and there are 2s. Basically, if you have that view, and most of us do have some version of that view that this is how relationships work or attraction works. And again, on a first meeting, this is not crazy. It is true that there are people who are objectively, that is, on average, by consensus, better looking than others, people who are a little better in social context. So there is some amount of agreement in an early meeting about who's a 10 and who's not a 10. But over time, and again, you'd need to do the sorts of studies that we do to know this, over time, that consensus wears off. And the person that, like, we sort of all agreed that, like, Jennifer was like a 7, but then we all got to know Jennifer a little better. And for me, she became a 9, and for you, she became a 5. And what's awesome about this, like, when I say awesome, I mean good for the world, like good for the well-being.
This is how it works.
This is, yes, this is how it works. And so what that says is you don't really need to find a 10. You need to find somebody who's basically a 10 for you. You don't need to find somebody who likes dogs. You need to find somebody who likes your dog, right? And again, this mostly isn't a process of, finding the person with the exact constellation of attributes in advance. It's mostly a process of like getting to know each other, building some sort of like little culture between the two of you, and then leaning into the culture and doing the funny callbacks, right? And these little things that we do, the in-jokes that we have, like this is the nature of bonding. How is it that one of us initiates sex with the other, right? Like not that often is it, I'm kind of feeling randy. Do you want to have sex right now? Sure, God bless. Like that's as good a move as any. But most of us have developed within this specific partnership, a way of being like, so you feeling it? Like is now the time? And those are the sorts of things, these idiosyncratic forms of communication, that are really about how we build a relationship that makes us feel like this person is a 10 or at least an 8 for us. And that's really all we need.
Mm-hmm. That's quite a hopeful message, and it goes in very much contradiction to a lot of the red pill ideology, which is all about increasing your sexual market value and the idea that it's an objective measure. If you're a 10 to one woman, you'll be a 10 to all of them. Something interesting I got from you guys as well was that the women in your ecosystem, whether it's your friendship group, a couple of exes thrown in there, they will all have a very different view of how attractive you are or how good of a potential partner you are, ranging from 0 to, gosh, I wish he would just ask me to marry him eventually.
Yeah. No, right. So what these studies show, again, hypothetically, I've got Eli's exes, and I'm putting them all in a room, and I'm going to have them discuss how good Eli is or was as a partner, right? Usually this is was, because we're not looking at people who are poly. You could do the thought experiment with poly folks and do something similar. But I get Eli's exes in a room, they're really barely going to agree on whether he was a decent partner or not. Right? They're going to have very different takes about what he was like. And I think that's consistent with this idea that that the pursuit of the universally desirable partner is going to be frustrating and will lead you astray. And that a lot of what makes relationships good or bad are cultivated. It's sometimes due to luck. I mean, I don't want to do some like meritocracy. If your relationship is bad, it's your fault. Like there's a lot of luck involved as well. But it's these sort of chance and sort of creation elements that take place over a long period of time that get relationships into a good or a bad place.
Mm-hmm. What about a guy whom is viewed by the women in his life and his exes as there are very different extreme opinions of him. Some of them hate his guts, want him to die. Some of them are still in love with him. Versus the man whom everyone goes, yeah, he's a good guy. We had a nice relationship. It was amicable. What does that say about a particular person's personality or the way they treat others in a relationship?
I get this. I remember, like, I knew guys like this in high school, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think I inspired fairly vanilla reactions across the board. Not a lot of variability, but I knew the guys who was like, it's like, her with him? Like, how do you do that? Like, all the other girls think they can't stand this guy, right? So this idea that different people have different variability. Believe it or not, the level of sophistication that you're describing is remarkably hard to capture in the science. It's only been in like the last couple of years that people have even started thinking about the issue you raise.
Yeah, and actually, Paul, in fairness, I don't think we have an answer yet. I think it's partly for what you said. But the question that you asked, the question is so interesting because we mostly talk about like mean levels, right? Some people are more appealing, some people are less appealing. You're asking a question about variation, right?
Yes.
Is it the case that some men get a consensus rating by women at a certain level and other men get like an all over the place rating by women? And you're ahead of where the science is. It's an interesting question.
I think we definitely see it in pop culture in terms of appearance. Let's say it's a rock star, right? Let's say it's Machine Gun Kelly. Now, to the women in his audience, he's a 10, but to the 30-year-old secondary school teacher who likes Hallmark movies, she'd probably be horrified to go on a date with
Yeah,
somebody
right.
like that. Yeah.
So again, the one thing I would say about this is remember that you're talking about the case where a lot of our ideas don't apply. And what I mean by that is the place where you don't actually know a person, right? So you idol worship the person from the 33rd row, or you've like seen a photo. There's no doubt our preferences predict our attraction in those cases. So if I say, I don't like guys with lots of tattoos above their shoulders, there are going to be like, I'm going to swipe left on the guys who have those things. The question that has interested us is a different question, which is, all right, but now you've gone speed dating and Paul and I have been able to set you up with 12 men, and there's variation in how many tattoos they have. How big a predictor is the tattoo thing to you? And the answer there is much smaller than you would have thought.
That's a
Right.
good study.
That is a good study, the tattoo neck study. Yeah.
I think that would be very interesting. It's especially because in today's, if you compare our culture today compared to the 1950s, we have much greater levels of individual differences. So before, in society was a lot more homogenous. And what a good man or a good woman was to one person would be very similar. Whereas now we have a huge amount of variety. Do you think that perhaps the abundance of choice, or the apparent abundance of choice, and then this overall variety that we have in society is causing people to be more dissatisfied with their dating outcomes and also their dating potential as far as they perceive it?
I think it's very plausible. I mean, especially the apps do foster this sense that there are always better choices around the corner, right? And if you just keep swiping, you're really gonna strike gold. I don't think that's a useful mindset when it comes to dating. I really like the thought experiment of, if you imagine living in, believe me, I'm not trying to say like, if we could just go back to being hunter-gatherers, everything would be better. I'm not advocating paleo anything. But sometimes I think it is useful to remember that we evolved in an environment with fairly limited choices when it came to romantic options. We are used to living in groups of about 50 people. Okay? Many of those people are your relatives. They would not be the typical age range that you would consider for partners. You might know some people in neighboring groups, but you are talking about a pool of people, I don't know, 10, 15, like that you are ever going to meet in any ongoing way. And that is a lot of opportunity to develop relationships with these people and the other people that are sort of in your orbit, right? Networks of people. And that's where relationships classically have tended to come from. You described it as the ball pit earlier. And I do think that is a useful metaphor. And yeah, we do that in larger groups now. 20 years ago, that was the only way to meet people. But I do think that when we start imagining dating as a marketplace, I am shopping. This app on my phone is how I will do my browsing and my purchasing. We are engaging a part of our brain that is not it is not the mating relevant portion of our brain, I would argue.
Paul, I'm going to bring some of our Love Factually debate style here to this podcast as well.
Let's do this.
I'd like to give a glass half full variation on Paul's glass half empty answer to your question about, is it a problem that we have? I remember Aziz, do you remember, Paul, we were talking to Aziz Ansari, and he said you've got the world's biggest singles bar in your pocket or in your purse at all times, right? So he was concerned about this too, back in the day. And here's what makes me not worried. When people are really into their partner, it's as if the apps don't exist. And there's something in our field, there's two different versions of this. One is called derogation, so basically treating as negative alternatives, right? So to the degree that we're really attracted to our partner, we see potential alternatives and we're like, nah. And that's especially true. We especially derogate them in circumstances where the temptation might be real. That is, you're going to be alone together for an evening and having drinks, right? That's when you're like, no, there's no way that person would be appealing, right? So we are very good at protecting our relationships when we are committed, when we are happy. So I think the glass half full version of the answer to your question isn't that Paul is wrong. I think you guys are both right to be concerned about this. I think the relationships that this endless bevy of potential alternative partners, the relationships that is breaking up, are not particularly strong relationships. So I think if you were to like split relationships into like the better half and the worse half, I think the better half are oblivious to Tinder. It just doesn't exist for them. They're aware that there's this phenomenon and that their friends are on it, of course. But Tinder's not a real thing in their life. It's not a meaningful entity for them because of course they're not going to go on Tinder. Where I think you're breaking up relationships that might have otherwise made it is in this nebulous category of like, things feel kind of stagnant. I'm feeling a little wishy-washy. I hear about this app and like it's still on my phone, or I wonder if I just downloaded it and sort of, not jerked around. That's not what it is, but explored around for a while.
Some people do
That's true. And look, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like breaking up relationships, going through a hard spell, that might be a good thing or that might be a bad thing, depending upon how well the relationship might have recovered, how good this alternative relationship might be. But I don't think that the massive oversupply of romantic alternatives is breaking up the strongest relationships very often.
I think that it's somewhere in the middle that the problem is happening is of when you meet somebody either organically or on a dating app. Let's say you get past the 5-6 date mark and you start really considering whether to enter that stage of commitment and then denigrating all your other options. I think then it becomes very hard to commit to one person.
Oh,
that's the danger, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah. I think it is certainly. I mean, I can give a slightly optimistic take, even in that moment too. This is our colleague Samantha Joel, who talks about relationships sort of being on a conveyor belt. She calls it a progression bias. But the idea here is really from the moment that you become interested in somebody, decisions tend to push people toward greater investment and greater commitment rather than less. Right? It's not that people generally are wary, right? They look for excuses to get off they try to defend themselves from being hurt. They're generally doing yes and, okay, as the relationship goes forward. Now, again, this is like classically in our field. Are we studying the precise moments that you're describing there? We're not. I do think that there could be fragile moments in relationships where you could have invested further, but then something else pretty rolled by and you chase that thing instead. But for the most part, what we see is that once that train gets going, it's actually very hard to stop it.
So I'd like to do a glass half full version of this too. Not because I disagree, but because I remember
thought that was
dating.
quite optimistic.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. Fair enough. But this isn't something that I believe has been tested in any reasonable way. But I can tell you that I had this like model that I had when I was single and dating, which I called dating from strength. And the idea was like, I don't want to do you remember this, Paul? I haven't talked about this in like 15 years. But the idea was, I don't actually want to like go on a date with a person and then like figure that one out, and then like either that happens or doesn't happen, and then consider the next person. I thought the ideal is like you're dating a bunch of people, and I'm dating a bunch of people, and the circumstance under which you might want to get serious about somebody is when you say, "Gosh, it's Saturday, and I've got a bunch of options, and I was just with Johanna last night, but you know what? I just want to be with Johanna again, despite the fact that I have a bunch of options and that she has a bunch of options." And so the problem you're identifying, I think, is real. That is, in a world where we are considering whether to become serious, and sometimes that means exclusive, although not always, but when we're going to become serious about somebody, is it harder to do that when there's like a bevy of alternatives around? And I just don't know how big a problem that is, because I think what will normatively, that is usually happen, is that you will start to like one more than the others. And Friday night will become Saturday night, will become Sunday night. And there's 4 or 5 other amazing people you could be with, but this is the one you really want. And for me, obviously that doesn't work for everybody, but for me, that's the optimal way for people to become committed. Paul, what's happening over there? What sort of mockery is going through your head?
No, I get it. I think there's sort of 2 underappreciated components of the dating from strength model that always made it challenging for me to identify with. And so issue number one is that the very technical term is noise. Okay, but what that means is that communication breakdowns happen. Right? Mm-hmm. So you might try to initiate with Johanna to try to go out again, and like her phone died. Okay. Now for you, Eli Finkel, in the year 2003 or whenever this is happening, you're cool. You don't mind. For me, in the year 2003, in the year 2003, I have a freak out, absolute panic. Right. Right. I can't. So there's like noise. Imperfection in communication, I think, makes it hard for even mildly insecure people to date from strength, which I think was always my point.
You're not dating from strength, I suppose. Then, in that case, that's the point. Yeah.
No, I dated from begging.
I dated from weakness. Yeah. Well, I think that this is the approach that a lot of people, at least who can take it. My previous long-term relationship began in an incredibly similar way to what you were describing, Eli, where I went to San Diego for the day with this one girl that I was seeing, and the whole time I was just thinking, I actually wish that I was just with the other one that I was with this morning. And that was the moment it all clicked for me, and I asked her to be my girlfriend. Yeah, I mean, she's not here now, so I don't know what that says about the strategy.
My condolences to you and all of her loved ones.
Oh, no. I suppose there obviously is a level at which it's the right amount of choice, right? We shouldn't be trying to find a partner and they're the only person in the village, but we also don't need a complete harem and live like Dan Bilzerian. Is there any scientific research or evidence out there as to what the right amount of choice might be?
It'd be closer to your world than mine, Paul.
Yeah, but only to the extent that you perceive it, right? Like if you think you have a lot of choice, if you think you have a lot of good alternatives, that doesn't bode all that well for your current relationship. But that's usually because it means that something's off and you're looking around, right?
Oh, so you shouldn't even be thinking about it.
Yeah, well, yeah. If your goal is commitment, then should.
If your goal is monogamy, yeah.
But it's but in terms of like something objective, right? Something we could say about like where you would live or who you would surround yourself with. So much of this stuff is subjective. I mean, it's remarkable how you can have two people in the same situation with a partner with the exact same attributes, and wow, are their experiences wholly different. And that's because of the way we subjectively interpret not just a person's attributes, but also how those fit with our own attributes and our surroundings as well.
Yeah, I mean, consider how many people in major urban centers, how many 30-year-olds in major urban centers feel like there's nobody to date. I think it's really not primarily about the objective truth of the people around. It's more influenced by the subjective assessment.
Yeah. And what they really mean when they say that, and I don't feel that way, but I hear this all the time when I talk to women in Chicago. There's no good guys here. I mean, there's like 1.2 million guys. What they really mean is I go on a date every week and I'm not enjoying those dates.
Yeah.
And to some extent, too, I think that dates are tough, especially if dates are about, here's my name, rank, and serial number. Well, what are yours? Like,
here's my 21 questions.
Right. That's actually not a lot of fun. What's more fun is to do, for example, the Art Aaron 36 questions. I mean, some of our favorite movies to cover on the podcast are movies where the couples, as they're getting to know each other, kind of accidentally do the Art Aaron intimacy building research, asking each other questions about death, asking each other questions about like your greatest fears in life. This like Before Sunrise.
This is my next date. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
It's more effective than you'd think.
Yeah, it really is. It's remarkable because what it lets people do is it sort of sends people on conversational directions that just have a much greater likelihood of being interesting, right? It's not revealing some like deep truth about like, you know, if I'm afraid of death and Eli's really afraid of death, we're really going to hit it off. It's just more likely we're going to find something interesting to talk about than is like than like his hometown or something.
So games like We're Not Really Strangers and things like that could actually be quite a good idea on dates. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. Like the next time you hear somebody say to you, there are no good guys here, maybe ask, is the issue that there aren't good guys or that you're going on lousy dates? Because what lots of people I think call the resume exchange. Yeah. Do something interesting. Do something that at least if it were like, let's imagine that the date's going to be a dud. Do something that you're happy to have done. That's probably something more interesting than sitting in a cafe or a bar across a cup of coffee or a pint of beer or whatever. Do something interesting and entertaining. And besides, that will also give that person an opportunity to display themselves in an interesting sort of way for you to display yourself. Here, I mean psychologically, not physically display. Yeah, and so this is an opportunity for you guys really to get to know each other.
I love this. I'm already thinking about, I don't have any new dates in the pipeline, but if next time I do, what could I do that I would enjoy so much anyway, even if I didn't like her?
And the odds are good that if you do that, the odds are increased. I'm not saying the odds are good that you will like the person, because the reality is most of us are going to have to do a fair number of dates, meet a fair number of people before we find somebody that we really hit it off with. That's something that's not new. You know, again, I'm not talking about like the Pleistocene when you met like 5 people or something, or like hunter-gatherers when you met like 5 people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, you know, people have been doing setups forever. But I think the odds are not only will you enjoy the date if it's something that you would enjoy anyway, but the odds are that each of you will have displayed a more interesting part of yourselves. And so the odds are a little bit higher that you will like the person and that they will like you.
Right, like Ryan Gosling taking her Emma Stone to a jazz club.
That's right. It had nothing to do with what Ryan Gosling looks like. It was totally about his passion for jazz.
Yes, I'll see if that works so well next time I'm at a jazz club and looking at all the guys with beards down here and thick glasses, see if that works for them.
There's plenty of women who dig that.
That's true.
You seem so skeptical.
Well, I've seen those women. Let's just say that. Why don't we talk about
women with beards down to here?
No, the women that like that. Sometimes they have beards as well. You know.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about movies actually? And I didn't prepare any of this, but you mentioned Baby Girl, Paul, and I saw that earlier this week. Very interesting movie.
Paul, you haven't seen it yet, have you?
Yeah, right.
You haven't seen it yet?
God's honest truth is I haven't seen it yet, but you have. So Eli, you take it. Yeah.
Okay.
I've seen it. It was kind of exciting for me because, again, we're new to this whole like film thing. We're basically relationships researchers, and only recently were we now, I guess, technically like, you know, film critics. Yeah. And so I went to like a preview of that, like a month and change before it came out. It was very exciting for me. And I found the movie fascinating in a lot of ways. Have you seen Eyes Wide Shut? The movie she did.
That's one of my favorite movies, and I wanted to talk to you about that too. So funny you mentioned
I think you'll like that episode. Like the episode we did on Eyes Wide Shut. We had Peter Sagal, who's the host of Wait, Don't Tell Me, and very knowledgeable about film. So he was our guest on that one. I think that was a fun episode. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is, so that was Nicole Kidman with Tom Cruise, 1999. And it's mostly like a male sexual fantasy. It's crooked and warped because it's Kubrick, but it's mostly about male sexual desire. She has some desire in there too, of course. Fast forward, 25 plus years, and you get Baby Girl. Here's Nicole Kidman again. She's significantly older. I think she herself is something like 57 or something. And now it's a movie that's about her desire. So in the past, this was a movie about Tom Cruise's character's desire. Now we get her desire, but both of them are very kinky movies. And the new one is also interesting in that it plays around with some pretty morally complicated tropes. So in this case, she is a very senior executive. And she, I don't think I'm spoiling anything to say, starts a sexual romantic relationship with a male intern.
I actually don't think you can spoil this movie. I don't remember anything about, where at the ending where if I'd known that, it would have ruined the whole thing. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. But that movie is interesting because of how seriously it takes kink, right? So early on, we learn about her that she's been faking orgasms with her husband for a very long time because she absolutely needs to be dominated. That is her kink, and he's not aware of it or like isn't getting the signals. And so after they have sex, she's faked her orgasm. She goes and goes by herself to masturbate to kinky porn. And then she finds this intern who, for whatever reason, has clued in to the fact that she likes to be dominated. And it's interesting because it throws a lot of the Me Too tropes upside down because it's the older woman, younger man. I mean, she's extremely powerful. She's exactly the sort of...
I don't think this movie could have been made the other way around these days.
No.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that. It had to be this version of it. And because it's this version of it, we're able to engage with some of these ideas about the nature of fidelity and the nature of sexual desire and like what's a reasonable thing to expect from one's sexual fulfillment. If one isn't getting sexually fulfilled in marriage, like, are there options that are available? What do they look like? And what about hierarchy in the workplace? What is it that violates the boundaries? This one pretty clearly did, but you're right. They were able to engage in a way that wasn't what it would have looked like if the older person had been Harvey Weinstein.
Yes. And I also think that the things that happen in the movie in terms of the kinky things, it's very psychological. Like, there's actually very little nudity or even sex in the movie compared to equivalent movies. It's more about he seems to tap into her psychology and understand that the same way in that, well, he does with his dog that he trains. You know?
Yes. Yeah. That's right. I mean, it's interesting. I agree with you that it's not explicitly sexual, but it is a sexual movie.
Oh yeah, it's filthy.
It's not like It's not like, I mean, so Eyes Wide Shut, for example, has like, 70 women in a circle wearing nothing but stilettos and a G-string, right? It's not like, it's not sexy or nudity.
It's a little bit less sexual though. To me, it was less of a sexual movie.
Interesting. Yeah. I actually think it is probably a more erotic movie than the earlier one. The earlier one felt sort of chilly, and this one you can really feel her craving. I think the director did a great job of bringing her desire to the fore and asking questions about, again, really morally and psychologically complicated questions about the nature of desire, the morality of desire, social hierarchy in the workplace. It's a very good movie.
I mean, one of the, again, I haven't seen Baby Girl, but I've watched Eyes Wide Shut again pretty recently, and one of the things that I find interesting about the morality of that movie is that it is just not wearing on its sleeve what point of view it has, right? It really says, like, you could think this, you could think that sex is very dangerous outside of marriage, right? That is one reasonable interpretation of what the director's trying to say. It's also reasonable that what he's trying to say is something like men, when they have power, will do, sexual acts that your mind could not even possibly comprehend. That is also like a reasonable reading of what he's trying to do.
Or even just that when men get enough status and money, they can have access to the sexual fantasia. That's another possibility.
Right, exactly.
And I think with Eyes Wide Shut, there's a lot more to the story as well than just the sexual element. I mean, for me, what I think about the most when I watch that movie is more the lifting the veil of power and secret societies, and especially as we learned about, Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein.
Totally.
In hindsight, you go, "Oh, this was actually okay. Maybe it didn't quite look like that, but this was it."
Was trying to tell us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas a Baby Girl,
that's why he died. He somehow died before the film was actually released, and I'm starting to think maybe there's a macabre reason for that.
Well, I heard the conspiracy theory that. He filmed the moon landings, and as part of his deal for filming the moon landings was that he would never have a movie be censored. So then he makes Eyes Wide Shut and goes, "Oh, here's my movie." They go, "Well, look, you're really pushing the boundaries here. Kill him off, then you can censor the movie."
They did censor it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm just saying I have chills right now. So
Good stuff.
Yeah. But Baby Girl is very much about what happens within the marriage and her inner dynamics. Do you think there are some things that the movie got wrong or was perhaps unethical in its portrayal of that situation?
It's funny on the podcast we have a section for every episode of the podcast. For every movie that we talk about, we have an "Are we okay with this?" section that is either like, is there something in the filmmaking, something that the film is telling us about relationships that we're squeamish about, or that the characters are confronting. Baby Girl is very blatant about what's borderline or perhaps over the line, right? It's not like you'd watch Baby Girl and be like, were there any like ethical quandaries in there? So obviously there's infidelity. She's supposed to be committed to her husband and having an absolutely torrid affair. These days, I think most of us would say that the biggest transgression in there was the massive, power hierarchy and career implications, the difference between those two characters. Again, because it's a gender reversed, it's gender reversed from the stereotype, so maybe it's a little less threatening, but still that one's thorny. But again, so I think those are all complex issues. In terms of the film and the way that the film is wanting or asks us to think about these issues, no, I thought it was terrific and thought-provoking in the way that it asks us to engage with these moral issues. For example, one of the subtle moral questions in there is, what was her choice, right? Like, if she really couldn't be fulfilled with the sort of sexual engagement she had with her partner, is there any circumstance under which it's reasonable for her to start having affairs, to start seeking satisfaction outside the relationship, or is it appropriate that she sort of settle into a lifetime of not quite complete sexual fulfillment? And I think that is an interesting moral question as well.
Definitely. Go ahead, Paul.
I just know, too, that there are a lot of movies like this that what they do is they show you something that is borderline, and they essentially ask you, like, how does that make you feel? Does that make you feel uncomfortable? You should interrogate why this makes you feel uncomfortable. I love movies that do that. If I have a moral concern about anything, it's more going to be like the teen comedy style that's like, has more of a, well, this is just what boys do, isn't it? Like, that is the thing that makes me far more nervous, because it's not asking you to interrogate anything. Yeah. It's just asking you to like accept, like, this is how it is. I'm sorry.
Like Revenge of the Nerds.
I find that way more upsetting than stuff like this.
Yes, I suppose if it's any consolation, I think those movies have less of an impact on people's actual dating life and their schema about what a relationship should look like. Now, over the last 10 years in pop culture, we've had this new wave in media of starting with 50 Shades of Grey, then 365 Days. Now, this probably have less impact overall. We've got this whole new attribute coming back to mates preferences and dating preferences that I would imagine there isn't a whole lot of scientific research about. Am I right there?
It's not exactly our domain. Our colleague Justin Lehmiller, I know he hosts the Sex and Psychology podcast, and he, I think, has many episodes about things like kink. So in the sexuality research area, this is something that people do look at more commonly. But how exactly like kink or kink mismatch relates to like relationship satisfaction, or whether people are more likely to cheat, that is, I think, probably a little bit beyond what we know right now.
But I do think that this, just briefly, I do think this is part and parcel of what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about not only do we look for personal fulfillment and love from our spouse or significant other, but also this sense of growth and authenticity. It's not, it used to be that you should just accept it. Like if the sex isn't that great or you're not growing that much, like this is what marriage is, and it is until death do you part, and just deal. And anything less than that was immoral. To some extent, I don't want to overstate the case, but to some extent we've had a moral inversion where the unethical thing is not to be true to yourself. The unethical thing would be to stick in a marriage forever that was unfulfilling for you, or that you didn't feel like you were growing. And so we've had this new morality, and this is tied up, I think, in the acceptability and especially the visibility of kink. That people are supposed to have like authentic self-exploration and be proud of their sexual desires. And this is, I think, part of the whole movement that's known as sex positivity. I think it has pros and cons, but on balance, I'm pleased to live in a sex positive world rather than in a pre-sex positive world.
Well, I think it's very connected with emotional positivity, expressing how you feel about the relationship, because something that a lot of men will will be disappointed by is the fact that divorce rates are so much higher today than obviously they were in the 1950s and 60s. However, unfortunately, we can't go back and ask those people because a lot of them are dead. But I would imagine that marriage satisfaction was also much lower in many of those relationships that people simply were unable to leave because of social taboos, especially on the woman's part.
Exactly. You're getting very close to one of my major bailiwicks here. So again, The All or Nothing Marriage, a book I wrote that some folks might be interested in reading. So yes, divorce rates are higher than they were in the 50s and 60s. They are lower than they were in the 1980s. So what we actually witnessed is, I've talked about this, like it's not just love anymore, it's about emotional, basically authenticity and personal growth. That really started with a bang circa 1965 and cratered marriage, really devastated what they thought of at that time as marriage. Now, today we call it traditional marriage. That's a misnomer. That was like the model for marriage that existed for like 15 years, like from 1947 to like 1962. There was a particular vision. It happened to be when TV came into vogue. And so we think of it as the way marriage always was. Stephanie Kuntz, a historian, has a great book called The Way We Never Were.
This is the love marriage, the emotion. Yeah, okay.
It's love marriage, but it has a particular structure, right? This is the love-based breadwinner homemaker marriage. Leave it to Beaver, father knows best, this thing that we think of now as traditional marriage. And yes, the sexual revolution and the Vietnam protests, that whole countercultural revolution that really launched circa 1965 or so, that really did crater traditional marriage, that especially for women, that this was an institution, that this was a social arrangement that was no longer acceptable. Men and women alike protested, but especially women. This is in the wake of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique and a bunch of those ideas, the rise of second wave feminism. But what is much less appreciated is that we aren't really witnessing a story of marital decline. That certainly was the case from like 1965 to 1980. The odds of your marriage ending in divorce in that 15-year window went from, the likelihood of a marriage ending in divorce went from something like 25% to something like 50%, and now it's in the low 40s again. And among the college educated, so I don't know what what the sort of demographic profile of your listenership is, but for whatever it's worth, the divorce likelihood among college educated people has plummeted since the 1980s. That is, the large majority of people with a college degree who get married, death will do them part, the large majority. And I think what we are actually witnessing, again, this is sort of the thesis of that book, The All or Nothing Marriage, I think what we're actually witnessing is a new paradigm started to come into vogue, starting around the 1980s, and we're increasingly getting the hang of it. And more of us are able to have a sort of connection that was pretty hard to get when it was like his sphere of life and her sphere of life. Now we're sharing two spheres of life. He's doing diapering and she's got a career, and we're trying to figure out how to connect with that new sort of social structure, or relatively new, and I think we're getting better and better at it.
Yeah, so really we're actually, what we understand as marriage is not, or a good marriage is not this renaissance of what it used to be. It's a whole new thing that we have to navigate.
No, I mean, again, kindness. I mean, you said earlier that there's like a core of sort of decency, but even that, like, it wasn't, for most of American history, like the fact that your husband hit you wasn't a divorceable offense, right? It would have to be really severe abuse, right? And hitting didn't count. But yes, we are building, and I'm sort of proud, like the last generation or two has been pretty intrepid about figuring out, is there a way that we can connect in a way that's different from, Leave It to Beaver in the 1950s era. And it's been hard, and a lot of fragile marriages have split. But again, one of the arguments I make in the book is it's almost certain the case that the best marriages today are better than the best marriages of the past, because we're trying to connect in a different, higher sort of way.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. I think that the trauma that a lot of people of my generation or the millennial generation have is that their parents are of this era of mass divorce, or they haven't seen those examples of marriage working out very well. I wanted to come to this point, and I never found the appropriate moment, so we'll just go for it now. A lot of the red pill ideology likes to lean on scientific research, especially when it comes to the mating and dating preferences that we spoke about earlier. Even going back to, David Buss has been somewhat adopted by that group. How do you guys feel about that?
It alarms me.
Paul has
a lot.
feels about this.
Okay.
Take it away, Paul.
I have a book coming out in about a year that
Really?
will touch on a lot of these things.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, when I started in grad school about 20 years ago, I thought evolutionary psychology was very, very exciting, and I also thought it was very, very wrong. That it misunderstood a lot of things about human mating. Very focused on attributes, a lot of the things we've talked about today. Very focused on gender differences. With Eli, over the years, we've done a lot of work, supports some things that evolutionary psychologists have long said, like there is consensus about who is attractive in initial moments. But we've also shown that a lot of those things were pretty limited in their generalizability. Mm-hmm. That's all great scientific discourse stuff.
Yeah.
Lots of fun.
Good debate.
Okay.
Yeah.
But 10 years ago, I do think that something shifted, and all of this got a little reckless. And I actually don't fault the scientists much. Mm-hmm. I have one.
Well, some of the research had been done decades before this online movement even began.
I mean, right. Scientists gonna science, but this stuff escaped the ivory tower, and boy, did it get twisted and used in ways that the original practitioners didn't intend. But I also feel, and you'll find evolutionary psychologists today will say this, it's time for us to step up and clarify the record. Like a lot of these things we did, this is not what the science says. This stuff is not accurate. Certainly a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today, vis-a-vis mate value and gender differences, that stuff just didn't hold up in the science. But even some things like women own, like the hypergamy ideas, right? Women try to move up the ladder with the way that they marry. Only to the same extent that men do. Like, anybody ever read Jane Austen? And that's what's in the science too. The science is clear. People will use their attributes and try to leverage that in marriage, but there's no gender differences there. There's no gender differences in the attributes people are trading. There's no gender differences in the ability to move up the ladder with the way that you marry. So a lot of these things just, they take some of the ideas from EvPsych and then they run with it in ways that are not reflected in the science. I think the scariest thing of all is how people take evolutionary findings to mean something like, well, if it's evolved, that means I can't do anything about it. That means it's always going to be this way. And this is a bias, right?
Could you give me an example of something that would be used in those terms?
Yes, exactly. So these are studies that look at something called gender essentialism or gender determinism. Okay. And what they do is they present people sort of basic EvPsych findings. Oh, men are more aggressive because they evolved to be that way. Mm-hmm. Women are more nurturing because they evolved to be that way. Basic parental investment logic. And then you say people oh, do you think relationships between men and women will change in the future? Well, if people have just read that EvPsych description, they think no. It's always going to be like this.
It's in the genes.
And it's in the genes. And again, things can be in the genes. Even if that were true, that doesn't mean that it can't change. That doesn't mean that it can't be controlled. So we have all these bad ideas about what it means for something to be biological that we get locked into it's always going to be this way, and men and women are fixed, and my destiny is fixed, and we just have this giant mess to clean up as a science.
I think there's a temptation, especially for us men, of it seems somewhat comforting to see it as a scientific equation and attributes on a piece of paper, because then we don't have to navigate the very complex ideas of love. And, we all have awareness of people falling in love with somebody and they can't even quite explain why. Or
that's all of us.
Yeah, or something, something like sexual chemistry. I was talking with somebody on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we were saying, well, you can have sexual chemistry with somebody you don't even like, but you don't really understand where that comes from. In terms of falling in love, can this be attributed to the right concoction of the right hormones, or is there still an element to romantic love that we just haven't understood?
My guess is that very little of it will come down to anything in hormones or hormonal matching that you'd be able to measure, with the important caveat that the experience of love is happening in the brain and in the body.
With hormones involved. Yeah.
With hormones involved, right? So filtered through perception. But that's different than like if I could use an fMRI in your brain, or if I could assess the level of hormones flowing through your body. And again, there are, like, that sounds silly, but there are people who develop questionnaires that purport to do this. The idea that I can set you up with somebody who is like your sexual chemistry match, just get out of town. Absolutely not.
I mean, there is a little bit of work on testosterone levels and sexual desire. Right.
Sure.
Like, so yeah. So like, I don't know what the latest is on this, but for example, maybe trans men who have taken significant amounts of testosterone may well feel more sexual desire, just like baseline amount. But that's not about a compatibility with one person in particular.
No.
Right.
And being what we would describe as in love is very different from just all of these things together. And to an extent, does it surprise you that we still are so fixated on this concept of falling in love when it comes to what we want to experience in a relationship?
You know, that is a great question. I have wondered, again, in that book, I've really wondered whether we've structured marriage optimally. And again, when I say wondered, I mean wondered. I don't mean I'm saying negative, but we ask this one person to be a lot of different roles for us today, especially psychological roles. So our financial dependence is less than it was in the past, but our emotional dependence on this one person is absolutely massive by comparison. It used to be that people had like same-sex friends and that your best friend was like your buddy, and most of us, our primary confidant, our primary hangout buddy is our spouse. Again, I don't know the exact numbers, but that's much more so today than in the past. And I have wondered, whoever decided that the marriage must have these certain foundational qualities. So love, sexual monogamy and perpetuity, like your primary source of emotional support, right? Like there's a whole lot of these things. And I have just wondered the extent to which many of us wouldn't be better off if we split those sorts of expectations across people. And I don't know what that means. Paul and I, you and I disagree, I think to some degree, Paul, about this. The extent to which the person that you feel like is a good person that you want to make a life with and you'll parent well together and good for emotional support is also the person that you will be the only person you will ever have sex with again for the rest of your life. Like I've wondered about the wisdom of some of these choices. I'm not opposed, but I think the evidence is not clear either way about whether we've structured that in the most sensible way.
I think when it comes to sexuality, my own morality and expectations of a romantic partner is that can all be fulfilled by one person, provided there's an element of compatibility. One thing I'm really passionate about, though, is as a result of my YouTube channel, I started holding meetup events for guys that watch the channel. And it really took off, and it's turning into a whole social club around the world. And what's great to see about that is just men hanging out together.
Totally.
That's so needed today, especially for my generation. And I think I've made the mistake in the past, and I see guys making this mistake of you get a girlfriend, you work from home, you stop hanging out with your guy friends, and she becomes everything that you need her to be.
Everything.
And that's impossible. That's impossible for a woman to fulfill. It's impossible for a man to fulfill. So I really am quite passionate about fraternity, brotherhood, male bonding today.
Yeah. And I think in general, bringing it back to the live person interactions, right? Whether it's with, the fraternity. I'm also a major proponent of mixed gender friends. Right. I think this also does a lot of good for a lot of men and women too. Right. And not necessarily people because you want to date them. Right. But just to expand your mind a bit and get to know people who are a little bit different than you, I think ultimately is very helpful for people. And I think these things will be the part of the cure for the loneliness epidemic, what you're describing, and other mechanisms that get people to spend actual real time together.
Absolutely, because it's difficult to do organically, and I know that if I hadn't have started the social events that I start and my organization, I wouldn't have half as many friends as I do, and I wouldn't have the quality. The quality of friends is very important as well. It's important to have people that are different from you and that you can learn from, but it's also important to have a gang that you feel like we're the same, we get each other, we're on the same wave.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it will help people with their romantic lives too. We've spoken.
Seems likely.
Yeah, we've spoken as well. There's a couple of female content creators who do similar things to what I do, and they have such groups as well. We spoke about doing speed dating events.
That's awesome. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, this has been a lot of fun. This has really, really been an enjoyable conversation. And I also didn't expect the 3-person format to work out quite so well. But little did I know that you and both Eli and Paul are quite a double act together. So I don't think
we can do it.
Yeah, I think it went great.
Thanks so much for having
Thank you.
us. And
Thank you.
And this was a lot of fun. I'm delighted to hear about these events and how these are going. And if people want to hear more of Eli and my, generally describing nonsense, please check out the Love Factually podcast.
Absolutely. And I think that the Eyes Wide Shut episode has got to be high up for viewing for people, especially if they need to watch the movie if they haven't, because it's one of my favorite movies.
Mine too. Love it.
Yeah. And are you doing Baby Girl soon? Is Paul got to go to the cinema?
Yeah, I gotta go. I gotta go. Go see it.
All right, fantastic. Well, I hope you guys have a great rest of your afternoon, and hopefully we'll speak again at some point.